On today's episode, we have the one and only Mike Iaconelli. We have a long, candid conversation with Ike about his roots, his successes, his personality, the Ike Live talk show, Bass U, the Ike Foundation, so much good stuff. And at the very end, we talk about a technique that he knows quite a bit about, the Tokyo rig. All that and more on this episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
All right, let's get into this episode. I'm so excited. We have Mike Iaconelli with us today, the man himself. We talk about anything and everything you can think of, from, like I said, his roots, tournament successes, obviously, but some cool conversation there. And then especially diving into kind of his personality that has now become one of those things you either seem to love or hate. But I love Ike. I think he's great for the sport. He does a lot of stuff behind the scenes that I don't think gets enough attention. I think a lot of times when you think of Ike, you think of these sound bites, you think of, him screaming on the boat and all kinds of stuff, which again is part of the cool part about Ike and his personality. I think that's why people like him and people identify with him is he seems like a real human. He shows his emotion, something you don't see a lot of times in fishing. So I appreciate that. But on the flip side, he does a lot of stuff that, like I said, I don't think people talk about enough. So like he has an amazing foundation in the Ike Foundation. So we talk about that a little bit. He has a great fishing talk show, Ike Live. He does Bass U, which teaches people to fish. There's all kinds of stuff that Ike's doing behind the scenes that, like I said, I think people either don't know about or doesn't get covered enough. So I wanted to ask him about all that too. And then in true Tackle Talk fashion, we want to make sure that we're leaving you with something that you can use out on the water. So I wanted to ask him about a technique that I don't know too much about. I've used it a little bit. It's a very intriguing rig. It's called the Tokyo rig, and it kind of busted on the scene. And Ike was really at the forefront of that, of bringing it to the United States, of its popularity here, of working with VMC, and some cool things that came out of the Tokyo rig. So who better to ask about the Tokyo rig than Ike himself? So we do leave you at the end of the episode with some info that I think you guys can use out on the water and a new technique that you guys can try. But without further ado, let's get into our conversation with Mike Iaconelli. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are joined today by, if I'm going to be honest, probably our most requested guest ever. I get messages about this all the time. I'm so glad we're finally able to make it happen. Mr. Mike Iaconelli. Ike, thanks for joining us, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, so I'm excited for this. I have a lot of questions for you. This is going to be a fun episode, but as always, let's start at the beginning. I'm sure this is going to come up a lot throughout this conversation, but it's extremely evident to anybody with a set of ears and a set of eyeballs that you are probably one of the most passionate dudes in the sport. I mean, it's what your reputation is. You are known for wearing your heart on your sleeve, for being very vocal and very open. But the one thing that no one can fault you for is your just pure passion for the sport of fishing. Really curious of how you got your start in fishing. Who kind of got you into it, lit that spark into you that obviously turned into like a full-blown flamethrower?
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey for me. I'm passionate about fishing. I love it. It's my hobby. It's my job. It's what I love to do. I want to do it every day. I've been fortunate, but for me, it was my family who, got me involved in the sport. I mean, I grew up in an area that isn't what you would call the hotbed of fishing. Lived in Philadelphia, moved to Jersey, grew up in an area where a lot of people don't fish, but my parents, my uncles, my grandfathers, my whole entire family was a fishing family. So I was like sort of the oddball of this area. And every year from when I was, could walk till I graduated high school, we would go on fishing trips, family trips that were basically revolved around fishing. And that's how it all started for me. It didn't start with bass. It started with fishing. It started with learning how to catch something that swims, the fight, that pullback, that was what got me hooked. I think the excitement, the energy part of it is sort of who I am. It's hard to describe to a lot of people in other parts of the world, other parts of the country, but being in the Northeast, being Italian, I think, you're sort of, this is sort of how you are, in life anyway, so part of it is just kind of who I am and how I grew up, the people I grew up around. And, the other part of it is I honestly don't really feel like that unless I'm fishing. It's sort of like it's like the Hulk. You know what I mean? It's like kind of like I'm a regular dude most of the time, but when I put a fishing rod in my hand, it changes me, and it's just what I love to do. And there was a part of my career early on, where you want to fit in, like I'm trying to make it through the ranks, and I'm a semi-pro level, and even up to when I qualified to fish the tour. I think for a while there, you're very intimidated. You're the young guy. You're the new guy. You're the freshman. And you want to fit in. So there was a few years there in the beginning where I sort of tried to keep it in, and it was hard because I didn't do a very good job of it even then. But I think after a while, I got to the point where, I just wanted to be me, and it was more comfortable and just to let it out, and and it's who I am. And it's been a mixed deal for me. I get a lot of criticism about it. I have then, I do now still, even all these years later. But it's also been something that a lot of people can relate to. Even if it's not fishing, I think a lot of people can relate to being passionate about something, being on top of the world, being happy, being sad, being emotional. I think they are things that regular people can relate to. And so it's also been a gift, and it's definitely helped my brand, and it's helped attract a lot of fans. And I think people can relate to it, but it's been fun. It's been a long road.
You mentioned your Jersey roots there too. I'm a Midwestern kid. I live in like South Central Ohio. It is by no means like a fishing mecca. It's slim pickings around here. But over there in Jersey, I have to imagine, again, not a place that's like super, super well known, crazy fisheries, but you do have access to a lot of different types of water, I think, around you. You've got, you got your tidal water, you've got your salt water, you've got the Delaware River, you've got a lot of creeks that go through there, you have a lot of lakes. Do you think that helped you growing up of just fishing such a diverse area, I think, where you have access to all this stuff within driving distance? And I guess on that front too, which of those did you feel more comfortable with, like growing up? Which one did you cut your teeth on? Was it rivers and creeks, or was it lakes? Or
yeah, it's a great question, and that's the side of New Jersey most people don't think of. They think of New Jersey, they think of New York City, New Jersey. They think of skyscrapers, and and we do have that. We do have that, but there is a great variation of fisheries in this state for being such a small state. And as a kid growing up, even more so into my early teens to high school, I got to really experience and test a lot of different water. And you mentioned a few of them. We've got great tidal water and tributaries connected to tidal water. We've got natural lakes in the state that are what I call glacial lakes, that are deep and clear with weeds. We've got the Pine Barrens, which is tannic, shallow bog ponds, Florida. We've got salt. And yeah, as a kid, I got to experience a lot of that. I think it opened up the diversity of fishing for me to techniques and colors and how to catch fish, how to target fish. And the other part is we have a large population. I'm cornered between New York City, Philadelphia, Wilmington, Delaware. We have so many people. And I faced fishing pressure from an early age, going on a 90-acre lake like you, and being in the Midwest, and know it as well. I had to learn early how to compete when there's 80 dudes fishing a little lake. And so that's where my finesse roots kicked in early on, So it's been more of a gift than a curse for me to have grown up here in this state, and have really experienced a lot of these different fisheries. And it helped. It helped when I finally got to the semi-pro level and I started breaking out of the Northeast bubble. It definitely helped when I got to a place and I could look at it and say, oh shit, this reminds me of the Pine Barrens. Oh, this reminds me of the tidal Delaware River. It reminds me of Lake Apacong, which is a tidal glacial fishery. But I would say for me, probably tidal rivers and natural glacial lakes are the two types of waterways that I'm the most comfortable with. If it has a tide, I feel comfortable. I know I'm not scared. I know, what to do. My home river, which is the lower tidal Delaware River, has an 8-foot tide every day, twice a day. That's the average tide. On a blowout tide, it can be 10 or 12 foot, right? So, I know what to do in tide, and it's that comfort level. And you see that in other anglers with quarries or with, flatland fisheries or highland reservoirs or whatever. But for me, it's tidal water and it's glacial lakes. A natural lake, to me, I know how to read it, especially if it's got grass. Most of them have grass in them. It feels very, very comfortable to me. So I love when one of those fisheries comes up on the tournament schedule.
And that experience obviously served you pretty well. If you take a look at your resume, you have an insane resume. You have a fantastic career on tour, the 2003 Bassmaster Classic, obviously on the Louisiana Delta. You had Bassmaster Angler of the Year, the Bass Nation Championship, couple wins on MLF, like you name it, you've done it. So obviously, I think the biggest accomplishment for most folks, just when you're looking at it, I think it's easy to say like the classic. I think a lot of people just gravitate to that. But as far as you go, what means more to you? Does like a single event win, like a classic or like a just one-off win, mean more to you? Or is it something like an Angler of the Year where it's more of like a body of work?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a tough question. I want to answer it two ways, because that's a very great, tough question to answer, because I'm so proud of like all the wins, and I'm actually talking to you in my home office. We have another office, but I'm talking in my home office. And so like that's the classic, that's the AOY. The one in the middle is the Federation National Championship. There's an open win, an FLW win. There's an elite win on the Delaware River. I mean, every one of them to me is very special, and their dreams come true. When I was a kid, I just dreamt about competing, and then your dream sort of turns into I want to win one, and then your dream turns into I want to win two, and I want to, So I look around, and I'm very lucky that I had an opportunity to complete a lot of my dreams, that I had. I'd say the Classic and Angler of the Year have to be right up there near the top. The Classic is something that is very hard to win. There's less than 50 people walking the face of the earth that have won that event. It changes your life. You hear that. I know you've heard that before. But when you win that tournament and you grab it and you run with it, it's a life changer. It was a life changer for me. It changed my entire life. My business, my personal life, changed everything. Angler of the Year, I think from a fisherman's standpoint, is probably a more important title, because it does take you through a course of a series of events, and it says who is the best on the earth during that year. And I've been in the top 10 a few times in that hunt and was only able to secure it once. It's very difficult, very hard to win. The year that I won, which is 2006, it was 11 tournaments long, which in today's world, most of the seasons now are 8 or 9 events long. So, yeah. And back then it also ran from spring through fall. Most of the years after that have been just spring through summer. So it was that was an accomplishment that I don't know that I'll ever do that again. I certainly will try. That's a good one. And then even the Federation win for me as a grassroots angler was important, because I was just a club guy. I was just the local Northeast guy. And that to me was, a really, really important. I'm proud of that one, because it's where I started. I didn't have a bass boat and a silver spoon given to me. I worked really hard, just put my all into it. And to win at that level, was very important. And it's the Brian Kershaw Memorial Trophy. And Brian Kershaw was a hero of mine as well. So I'm very, very proud of that one too. I can't pick one. So that's the first side of the answer. The second side of the answer is, I don't want to sound too cheesy, because I'm very proud of all these wins. And I look at, just now, I'm like looking at them and I'm like, holy shit, I like can't even believe it, even all these years later. But I'm even more proud of the other stuff I've been able to accomplish, you know, like the stuff we're doing with the Ike Foundation, getting kids involved in the sport, you know, getting my own kids, you know, and the outdoors, the teaching we're doing at Bass University. I'm even more proud of that stuff. You know, and that's the stuff that's going to last for a long time. You know, trophies, just a trophy. It's just a piece of metal, you know, and again, I don't want to degrade it. It's amazing. But, you know, getting a kid involved in the sport that lives in a city that's 8 years old, that never tried it and falls in love with it, and it changes his life. And 50 years from now, I'll be gone, man. I'll be gone. I'm already almost 50s. I'll be gone. But in 50 years from now, if I impacted someone's life, man, that's cool, you know?
And I don't know how much truth there is to that, but I'm darn sure I either read an article or saw a video or something a long time ago that basically said that a lot of this almost didn't even happen. I swear I saw something that said that you were ready to hang it up or make a change or something after that 2003, or like the 2003 Bassmaster Classic was going to be your last event or something like that. How much is that all true, or how much of that was folklore?
It's true. It's absolutely true. And it's funny how, you know, when you look back on life, how certain things happen and it you know, changes the direction of your life. You know, basically in 2003, I qualified for the 2003 Classic in the fall of 2002. This is going to sound really strange, but back then the Opens qualified you for the next Classic. Back then the Classic was in the summer. So I made the 2003 Classic through the Eastern Opens by finishing third in the Eastern Opens in 2002, in the fall 2002. So this is all weird. 2002 into early 2003 was a rough year for me personally. My personal life was really, it was sort of all crumbling around me. I was, you know, had a long-term relationship with my ex-wife. Things were gone from the worse. You know, was going through a divorce. I had 2 small children. You know, at the time, I was really like, you know, I was in a place where I was blaming a lot of what was going on wrong around me. It was easy, right? The fishing was the scapegoat. I was saying, oh, fishing is the reason everything sucks, you know, and I sort of was in a bad place, and I had made up in my mind, I made a decision that, man, I got to get out of here. You know, being on the road and being focused and all these things have ruined my life. And looking back on it, none of this is really, you know, you're going through emotional distress, right? So you're not thinking straight. But that was my mindset. And, you know, even back then, I got to, you know, this is another point, which is even in, you know, by early 2003, although I had won some events at that point, I still wasn't secure in my career. Money was still tight. Sponsors were still fleeting. You know, I think that people assume that your first couple of years as a pro, it's easy. Well, it wasn't. I was still a starving artist, sort of, you know, so I was just sort of done with it. I was just sort of ready to move on. And I legitimately, this is a true story, I had went out and took a test in New Jersey called the Praxis test, which is a test you have to take to apply to be a teacher, to go to teaching school. So I already had a 4-year degree. My degree is in public relations advertising, but I was going to go back to Rowan, the school I graduated from, and get my teaching certificate. I figured I needed about, I figured I could do it within a year. I could get enough additional credits to get my teaching certificate, you know, and I had it made up that I was going to leave the sport. I was going to go and teach, which I also love. I still love it now. All these years later, I love to teach. And I can still fish, right? I could go back to fishing locally, and I love the New Jersey Federation. Now it's the New Jersey Nation. I loved it. So that to me was sort of like, it's just what I'm gonna do, And then I go and win the Classic. And I mean, literally, I think as that trophy went over my head on the stage, I sort of snapped out of it a little bit, and like over the next couple nights, realizing what I had in front of me, the opportunities, not just for me, some of it was for me, but the opportunities I had to grow the sport for a year, right? Because you're only a Classic champ for a year. I just had to take it, and I just literally did a 180, snapped out of it. It was like just a big slap across the face, and never look back. And now, like I said, in hindsight, right, we can have an intelligent adult conversation about it, and I can realize where my head was not thinking right back then, and I'm glad it happened this way because fishing had nothing to do with all that. All that stuff would have happened anyway, right? Everything good that's ever happened in my life has been because of fishing. That's the honest truth. And I just didn't see that at the time. And, people listening or watching this that have went through, stuff like that personally or tragedy or anything like that, they don't understand what I'm talking about,
And when I either read that article or saw that video, that was going to be my next question, was like, in an alternate universe, if you don't win the 2003 Classic, like, is there a Mike Iaconelli State Farm somewhere or something? So it sounds like you were going to go back and you were going to be a teacher. Did you know what you wanted to go into? Like what field or what age, kids you wanted to teach?
I mean, I love history and geography. I love communications. They were always my strong points. Anything mathematics was always not a strong point. So I think I would have ended up in, communications field somewhere. I love kids of all ages, but I always enjoyed speaking with young adults. So I think I would have gravitated toward high school, middle school, high school level. But I'm glad it ended up this way. I'm glad it ended up this way. I still get to teach, which is good,
That's what I was going to say. How ironic is it that because you win the Bassmaster Classic, now you can probably make the argument you were able to teach and impact like 1,000-fold the number of kids or the number of young people you were able to impact. Not to say that, the impact you make as an actual teacher, that's amazing. But just the irony of, because you win the Bassmaster Classic, now you're teaching, hundreds of thousands of kids through, Bass University and through your YouTube videos, through the Ike Foundation, everything. So that's really cool. So then obviously the next 17 years after that, it's been at this point, it's crazy. Been jam-packed of every memory, every sound bite you can think of from Mike Iaconelli. There's now things, that on the internet are deemed going Ike or going full Ike or Ike being Ike or whatever. There's just all this kind of stuff. And you've always been unapologetically loud, emotional, animated, and now there's just all of these, there's compilations on YouTube of you just doing primal screams of excitement. It's crazy how much of a life that side of your angling career took on its own too. And if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, we're going to insert a few sound bites for you right now, just so you can listen and see exactly what we're talking about. But you've always been the guy that wears your heart on your sleeve, wears your emotions on your sleeve. Was that something that you always had? And like you said, just early on, you tried to suppress and just you felt comfortable with it enough now with everything you've accomplished and stuff just to kind of let it out? Or is that something that just kind of built more as your career went along, as the stakes get higher, as the tournaments get higher, more of that just kind of blood rushing, everything just boils up and all kind of comes to the surface?
I mean, it was a combination of things. We talked a little bit about, in the very, very early beginning, it was almost like you want to fit in, so you sort of hide a little bit maybe of who you were. And, I want to say about 2002, 2001, 2002, along with this other stuff, my uncle was going through cancer. He had Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 4 when he was diagnosed. And he, his outlook wasn't good. And he fought it, and he's doing great all these years later. But when he was going through that for whatever reason was sort of a wake up call to me, that, man, life is short. Like, be you, have fun, right? Be who you are. And, I think in that year, that 2001, 2002 timeframe, I just started to sort of just let it out. And, so it's who I am. But the second part to it is I was, smart enough, or I had enough knowledge of branding and marketing from school mainly to say, what things about me should I highlight, and what things are things that people can relate to. And so, about that same time, your brand sort of starts to come together, right? And best brands are brands that are real, are authentic brands. These aren't things that I made up, and this is me. This is who I am, right? And so, it all kind of started to snowball, and I realized that people are like me. People scream like me too, and man, this is good. And and the style of dress and music and logoing, and all this stuff, taglines, you recognize these things and they become part of your brand. And I've been lucky to capitalize on a lot of that stuff and create a great following. When I met my current wife, really everything even sort of got to the next level. We met in 2006 before I won Angler of the Year, still early on in my career. And as she started to, as our relationship built and she started to get more involved in my business, she really was able to help me build a lot of what we have today. I would have never imagined, the business that is the size of the business that we have now, all these branches. And I never imagined any of that back then. I just wanted to fish. I just like to fish, man. And now Bass University and Ike Live and Going Ike and the foundation and shirts and hats and merchandise and licensing and TV shows and podcasts like this. I mean, this is crazy. And she's really a great business person, and she's helped me navigate and grow the businesses. And I owe a lot to her as well,
And like you said, it was smart on your part. It's obviously like people relate to it because it's so just sincere, right? Everybody gets excited. Everybody has emotions. Like the one thing I don't understand is, like, obviously it rubs some people the wrong way. There's some old crotchety folks in the fishing industry that think, oh, you're just supposed to, like, catch a fish and then silently put it back in the water and sit down and cross your legs and sip your tea. It's like, that's not how fishing is. But like, I really don't understand why it's such a polarizing thing to cheer. Like, this is an actual sport. It's like, you would never expect, like, Pat Mahomes to throw a 60-yard bomb and then just like silently walk back to the sidelines. Like, the dude's screaming his head off. It's every other sport you're allowed to celebrate. Fernando Tatis hits a walk-off home run. He's not just, quietly walking back. He's, cheering, he's screaming, they're dumping Gatorade. It's like, why do you think it's taboo in fishing to show your emotions, I guess? Why do we have to hide it?
Yeah. I think if you look at it, there's a couple things. The one is, our sport definitely is a younger sport, and it definitely has grown from maybe not a more it's not necessarily didn't grow from a mainstream place, right? So when you look at other professional sports, a lot of them have started in the late 1800s, early 1900s. If you look at golf and baseball and hockey and football, they're all very, very old sports. Our sport started in the 70s. So it's, in terms of the history of sports, it's still a new sport. I think some of that has to do with it. Culturally and geographically, it was a Southern dominated sport. The body of anglers for a lot of years was always an older, more Southern gentleman style character, and that's okay, So, for me to come in the 90s, in the late 90s was, it was different, and it was weird, and it was change, and of course, I think that always, draws a lot of criticism in the beginning. And here we are years later, and it's gotten better. It's gotten better as our demographics get younger. Like I'm looking at you, Andrew. I don't know how old you are, but you got to be in your 20s somewhere,
yeah.
Right? And you got a baby face, so you look younger than that. But as our fan and as our demographic gets younger, I think it becomes more acceptable, and I think the sport has opened up because of that, which is great. We want more people involved, So there's all that's there. But let me tell you this, and I can confidently say this, especially now as I get toward the end of my career and can look back. I can tell you, and this is the same in other sports too. I can tell you that having non-fans, having people that dislike what you do, having people that, the word used, I don't want to use that word, but having opposition is good. And it's one of the things that grows a good solid brand into a rock solid brand. And, if you take away all that negativity over the years and criticism, I'm not the same angler, and the Ike brand's not as strong. And so I don't want to say I'm glad, but I don't want to take any of that away, and I don't want to change any of that. And I understand it. I'm not the vocal one, but I follow hockey. I love hockey. I love football and baseball, and I got athletes that I'm kind of like, I'm turned off by. I'm never the kind of guy that would write online about it. That's just not who I am, but I get it. I totally get it. I understand it. And again, for me, I need those guys too,
Yeah. You're never going to have a good brand that doesn't have critics. Like that's I think it's part of what you're getting at too, is like, there has to be people on both sides to make you popular. And it just comes with the territory. If you don't have critics, you are not big enough to get to where you are today.
Yeah.
I know you said you're glad for a lot of it. Is there a part of you that gets kind of, I guess, I don't know, pissed off, or it sucks sometimes when there's always a camera in your face? So like both emotions get shown all the time. Like, yes, you have the days that everything's going right and you get to, scream and you're pumped because you just called, the fish that wins you the tournament. But then at the same point, there's like the days that nothing's going right and there's some dude in the back of your boat shoving a camera in your face and getting you just lighten up the dictionary. It's like one of my favorite clips is, I think, what was it, 2013? It's the Bassmaster Classic with the Grand Lake dog.
Yeah. I mean, you hit it on the head. Like, I'm passionate and emotional, and that happens both sides, right? That happens when things are great and when things are gone really bad. And yeah, I mean, it's been captured over the years, and I don't advocate anyone, doing what I do. It's who I am. It's how I handle it. I sort of, I've learned to like get rid of that emotion quick, and then I'm able to go on with my day, and it's how I handle it. And again, I don't advocate that, but, I think for me, it's, even the negative has been a good thing because it has made me more relatable. And I think everybody's went through a bad time and a failure and a lost fish, and everyone's had a barking dog barking at them. And, I think it makes me more relatable. People can relate to it. So that's good. Now I think I have calmed myself down a little bit over the years, maybe a little, maybe gone from a 10 to like an 8 or something,
Yeah, but I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's like you're human. It's what people identify
Yeah.
with when they see that. It's like, who hasn't had a crappy day where nothing's going right, and then there's just one thing that just pushes you over the edge and gets under your nails, like some dog that has nothing to do with what's going on today because of your boat troubles, and you just snap at it for a second. Like, everybody's been there. Those are those relatable moments that, like you said, I think your personality shines through a lot more than some other folks in the sport, and I think that's why people like you. So it's definitely been a good thing, I think, for your brand and what you've been able to do. And then, speaking of your brand, you've been able to parlay that into a lot of things that we talked about that you mentioned a little bit earlier. So, you have your YouTube channel, you have Bass U, you have the Ike Foundation. So I want to hit on a couple of these individually, starting with Ike Live. So there's a lot of people that listen to the show that I guarantee listen to Ike Live too. Why was that something you wanted to do and get into, to make like a fishing talk show? And it's really cool because it's not just the normal tips and tricks and everything. It's like a fly on the wall of just some buddies, hanging out, having a good time. And that's definitely the feel of it and why I think people love it. What makes you want to start that?
Yeah, it was, man, it was a lot of years ago. It's funny because it still feels like one of our new platforms, but it's, I think this is actually going on 7 years coming up. It'll be 7 years. So, it was one of those things where, for me, I'm an older guy. I never really understood podcasting or video podcasting. And I was a radio guy as a kid. And, so I understood radio, but I really understand this. And we have a good friend down in Oklahoma named Mark Jeffries. He hosts another great podcast, which is Bass Talk Live, really, really good one. And he was one of the originators of a podcast, a video podcast that focused on fishing. And, I sort of started to take notice of it through him, and he would really kind of keep bugging us like, guys, you got to do your own. And the thing that really brought me over the top with it and why I wanted to try it was the ability to connect with fans, the ability to connect with people in a new way. Up to that point, it was, I had to meet somebody at a fishing show, at a sports show, at a seminar. I had to meet them at a tournament, or I had to try my hardest through social media to get back to every single person. And it's very, very difficult. I still try my best. Every day I try my best to write back and contact people. But as that got more difficult, and as my time got more consumed of physically going and meeting people, I said, what a great way to sort of have an outlet to be able to talk to people, have conversations with people, answer IMs, take calls, so that was sort of what took me over the edge. And we decided to try it, build a studio right here, not far, something that was easy to get to. And, early on in Ike Live, we didn't really, not only did we not know what we were doing, but we didn't know what Ike Live was. So, when you look back, and every once in a while I go back and look at our first 2 or 3 podcasts, they were really bad. They were poorly produced, and there was no format, and it was not great content. But as time went on, and this cast that I assembled, we all sort of understood what the show was. And what we realized, and this is why I think so many people love Ike Live, is as we kept the show simple and talked about things that weren't talked about on normal fishing podcasts, it really, really started to be successful. And, at its core, Ike Live is a bunch of guys that grew up together fishing, and we like to drink beer. That's a pretty safe formula. And we do try to focus on other things. We touch on technique a little bit, but we mainly reserve the instructions for Bass U. And on Ike Live, we can talk to fishermen and celebrities and athletes, and we can just have fun conversation. And it's been a great show. I know a lot of people enjoy it. We get a lot of our viewers down the road as they're driving to work. We get a lot of listeners as they're driving to a tournament. killing time. They have insomnia. They put the head earbuds in. You know, I hope we're entertaining people. You know, if we're entertaining people, we're doing what we're supposed to do, you know?
And it brings up a good point too, that there definitely was, you came on fairly early on in a lot of this like online show slash podcast slash whatever. You were relatively early, especially in the fishing scene there. And there, I think the reason podcasts and stuff like that have done so well lately is there's definitely an appetite for long form conversations that you don't get anywhere else, because up to this point, traditional media would give you, a minute to 2 minutes and a spot, and you have to try and get some point across in 60 seconds. And it's like, that's not how a conversation goes. That's not how you build rapport with somebody in 60 seconds. Like, it takes 30 minutes, 45 minutes to get to a point where people feel like they know you, they feel comfortable with you, they like the conversation, they can identify with it. And you just can't do that in 30, 45-second sound bites. So I think, BTL and you and stuff like that definitely hit the nail on the head, that there are people that just want to sit down and listen to people talk fishing or talk, semi about fishing in the Ike Live, universe, where it doesn't have to be, cramming info down your throat all the time. It's just, sit down, relax, and listen to some buddies talk and listen to some conversations that you're not going to hear other places. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, we've been, like I said, we've been lucky. We've been able to, push the boundaries a little bit on what a fishing podcast is. And, the other thing too is it's just fun, and I think people pick up on that, like a lot of things in your life that you have to do, and me too, aren't as fun, right? They feel like work. You have a chore list, or you have a list of things you got to do, and you do them, and but they're not as fun. But that is genuinely fun. We love hanging out together. It was something we would do anyway, right? And it almost is like an excuse to get together twice a month, right? So we're real lucky, and we're pushing the edges a little bit. And I hope people enjoy it. I hope people like it. And to get someone to watch even for 30 minutes in today's world is very, very difficult. 2020, consume these little, you hit it on the head, little bits, little bites, and we're able to capture people for a long time. And it's very valuable to the companies we work with as well. We've got a great supporting cast at Ike Live, Mystery Tackle Box, Liquid Mayhem. We've got Founders. We've got Tin Cup Whiskey. We've got some great companies, TH Marine, that Torpedo, that work with us. And they love that engagement for 30 minutes, for an hour. Some of our guys sit and watch for 3 hours. We have a tendency to be long-winded on all our shows. So that's very valuable. It's hard to even quantify how valuable that is,
100% agree. So you have Ike Live, and then you have your YouTube channel, which is a lot more like, if you like those videos of like top 3 late fall baits, you had one the other day of like, how to fish a wake bait, that kind of stuff, where you're just like educational, kind of condensed, very straight to the point content. Your YouTube videos do a really good job of that. And that's kind of what is interesting with what you've dipped your hands in, is you've done a very good job of like realizing what form of media is for what. So it's like you don't really confuse a lot of things, right? Ike Live is sit back, relax, have fun, we're going to talk. You don't try and, shove a bunch of tips and stuff down people's throat, because that is for YouTube, that is for Bass U, stuff like that. So you do a really good job with that. And speaking of Bass U, for those that are listening to this podcast, we are very tip heavy. We're very, educational. We're out there for like the middle guys that are like, you're not a pro angler, you're not a brand new novice, you're somewhere in the middle, and you still got a lot to learn. So we do a lot of tips, a lot of, educational components and stuff. And that's why I think if you listen to this podcast, you will really like something like Bass U. It is for people that want to sit down and they want to consume media that is, at the end of the day, going to make them a better angler. And it's not just like empty hours of watching, somebody with a GoPro chest mount catch fish out of a pond. Like it's to make you a better angler. So how did Bass U get started? Where did that idea come from?
Yeah, Bass U was another one of those businesses that started as one thing and sort of figured itself out, and a lot of our businesses have done that. A lot of life does that, but Bass U, the history of Bass U is basically a program prior to Bass U called Bassmaster University. And it was actually a seminar series that was owned by a gentleman out of Oklahoma that licensed the Bassmaster. And he would go across the United States and hold on-site 2-day seminars. Myself and a good friend of mine, Pete Glusick, who's on Ike Live, known Pete forever, we were students at these. So we're now, now we're dating ourselves, but we're talking about, the early 90s. We sat in on these classes, and they were unbelievable. They were up close and personal in a classroom setting, listening to your heroes, Denny Brower, Gary Klein, all the guys that I grew up watching. They're right in front of you. And, we loved being students there. Later, as Pete's career developed, he was one of the first pros from New Jersey. He was actually the first pro from New Jersey. As my career developed, we got invited to be speakers in this seminar series. And when we were on the other side, we loved it just as much. We loved getting in front of people and educating that, you could shake their hand, you could show them the bait. We loved it. And right about when ESPN got involved with Bass, which is the early 2000s, they severed their relationship with this guy and terminated a Bassmaster University. They terminated the seminar series. It went defunct and laid idle for a few years. And I want to say, in right after, not too far after I won the Classic, 2004 or 5 or so, Pete and I just got to the point where this is something that was so good. We miss it. The students miss it. The speakers miss it. We got to bring this back. So we rekindled it. We used the old program as a template. We rebuilt it. And our initial plan was to grow it to have 20, 30, 40 seminars a year in cities all over the country, hire the best pros in the world to talk about what they specialize in. And that's how it started. And, we had a good little run there in the beginning where we were growing the on-site programs. And at one year, I think we had it up to about a dozen, a lot of them in the fall through winter when people weren't fishing, they're wanting to learn. But as time went on and as media changed and as digital access changed, we really started to expand it into how can people learn if they can't make it to a seminar, right? That's what we start running into a lot. Man, somebody wants to hear Aaron Martin speak about drop shotting, but they can't get to our Birmingham class because they live in California. They can't physically get there. So then, we really started to say, how can we grow this where we can do the same thing, virtually, through digital content. And that was sort of the second phase of Bash U, where we realized that the real future, and we'll never get rid of on-site programming, even with COVID right now, we're still tiptoeing around on-site programming. It's the core of Bash U. But where we've really grown it is through what we're doing right here, right? Is through, education at your fingertips. And if you want to learn through a laptop or a phone or an iPad, if you want to learn at midnight because you're an insomniac, if you want to be on the water and be able to pull up a class and listen to Dean Rojas talk about frogging as you're frogging, that model really changed the business. And so, the bulk of the business now is a subscription service, and it's great. It's a reasonable price. It's next level hardcore education, and what I do on my YouTube channel, my In the Shops I'm so proud of those, and people love them, but they're 5 to 10 minute tips. Bash U is next level, so if you want those hour and 2 hour topics, and if you want to put in the search bar frogs and get 370 videos on frogs, Bash U is the place to go. So it's been awesome. And for me, just to jump back, it has personally fulfilled that teaching aspect for me. I love it, and it's a great outlet for me to be able to teach and connect with people through teaching.
Yeah. And that's kind of an important thing to hit on too. I think a lot of people sometimes will ask, like, well, what's the difference between a Bass U subscription and just going and looking up tips on YouTube? And it's like there's a big difference in the quantity, the quality, the effort that you're going to get from the person leading the class of something like a Bass U versus somebody that just gave you 4 or 5 tips in a YouTube video because they had to upload that month. Like, you know what I mean?
No, and I'll put it back on myself. They're way better than my videos that I put out myself. They're the best way. It's that next level education. They're very detailed. They're very they're long form presentations. And the other big thing is, we're using the world's best fishermen. I mean, when you look at the roster of guys that we utilize, it's really blows me away, from the veterans of the sport to rock solid, middle-aged, middle career guys to rookies. And, we add a new piece of content on Bass U every week. So you're getting this stuff, the best anglers in the world talking about what they love to do, and you're getting it in long form content. It's really, really good. I'm a subscriber. Like I go back and I review seminars on things that I feel like I'm weak on. I still feel like I need to learn on how to fish extremely deep water, electronics I need work on. So these are things that I even go back and study. But it's really great content. I mean, if anybody's watching and listening right now, and you want to sort of get to the next level with learning, check it out. Go to it's bassu.com, bassu.tv, or bassuniversity.com. Either one. It's great stuff. It's good stuff.
And then the final thing that you have kind of your hand in here, and I think, at least to me, would probably be the most rewarding, would be the Ike Foundation. And the Ike Foundation, I love the sentiment behind the Ike Foundation of just trying to get more kids out fishing, and kids that wouldn't have that opportunity afforded to them on their own. I think it's one of those things. It's like, yes, you can teach people to be better, anglers all day long. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. But as far as introducing a kid to fishing for the first time that would have never been introduced to it, like, I mean, there are people who, I firmly believe when I say this, fishing has saved people's lives before. Like, everybody has to have a crutch. Everybody has to have some sort of something they lean on for their release or their decompression time. And I think a lot of times fishing is a very healthy form of decompression, a very healthy, kind of crutch or addiction or whatever, versus some of the other stuff that are out there that a lot of these people would end up in had they not been introduced to fishing. So can you touch on why you started the Ike Foundation and what your kind of overall goals are with it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you hit it on the head. I mean, of all the pieces of the business, it's the one we're most proud of, and it's the one that feels the best. You know what I mean? It just feels so good when you're engaged in it. But, it started, I guess maybe right around 6-7 years ago as well. Maybe right around that same time frame. And, Becky and I have worked with a lot of charities over the years, and we still do, from cancer charities, to everything, to feeding the hungry, and we love supporting those organizations. But it really sort of felt right in the term of our business and my career to start a platform, a foundation on our own, and like when we started talking about it, it was almost like there wasn't even any hesitation, right? It was like, we need to start a foundation. We need to do something really good. What do we do? And like, it was almost like Becky looked at me and I looked at her, and I'm like, yeah, kids fishing. It was almost like there wasn't even anything to think about. And, so that's sort of where it started. And then it was like, well, what do you mean? What are we saying here? And I used a lot of my childhood sort of as, maybe a model for it, growing up in Philadelphia and then New Jersey, seeing, I can remember going through grade school, middle school, and high school, and nobody fished. We're in a city or just out of the city, suburbia, and, fishing was not cool and nobody knew anybody that fished. And, I sort of used that as a template. And that really became the goal of the Ike Foundation, which was, to get kids fishing, but to get kids fishing really, especially to target kids in areas where they wouldn't normally fish, right? And that sort of became our mission. And, right away, as we started to hold events and started to say, get the messaging out, people really understood what this was all about. I can remember one of the first events we held was a kids casting event, not even fishing, right? So we're talking about kids casting a rod and reel. We held it in Central Park in New York City, and we had thousands and thousands of city kids come through that had never even held a rod or cast before. And, it was like very, very apparent on that first event that this is our mission. This is what we need to do. And every year, it got a little more focused. And as the foundation grew, we were able to hire a team. And now we have a whole team of Ike Foundation ladies. They're all women that do a tremendous job of, getting kids involved in the sport. And, a lot of it too is sort of, we try to aid existing groups in what they need. So, we can't get everywhere. So if a group in Portland or Seattle or Los Angeles or Dallas or La Crosse, Wisconsin, or, wherever, calls us and said, look, we have all these kids that live here and they want to fish. They want to try it. We don't have rods. We solicit donations, we solicit rods, and we provide those organizations with the rods. So, we dabble in events, we dabble in messaging, we dabble in securing products, everything to get kids involved in the sport. And I think you hit it on the head, man. I think we really have changed already, just in these 6 or 7 years, have impacted people. And we're not trying to create professional fishermen. That would be great. I would love it if years from now someone said, man, I was at one of your Ike Foundation events in Chicago and now I'm a fishing professional. I hope that happens. But we're trying to take a kid that's never fished and get them to say, this is a fun sport. Show them that it's one of the last sports that connects you with nature. Conservation, right? Like all these things that are so important, all these life lessons you can get from fishing. Just have an appreciation for it. And, maybe they only fish once a year. Maybe when they're adults, they say, man, I had fun when I did that Ike Foundation thing. I want to take my kid fishing. That's sort of our mission. And it's one of those ones that, like I said, the trophy's so important, but that's one of those ones that's pure. And it's good, it's a good thing,
Yeah, that's what it's all about too. At the end of the day, that's one of those, like, your head hits the pillow and you're proud of what you're doing. And that's kind of, I don't know, you can't put a price on that kind of stuff. And finally, we always try and keep it a little bit educational here and leave people with learning something that they can apply to themselves out on the water. And something I probably need to add to my arsenal a little bit more and fish a little bit more and give more of a shot is the Tokyo rig. I'm not a big Tokyo rig guy. I've definitely used it over the past, I'd say probably used it 4, 5, 6 times over the past year or so. It's one of those things I need to fish more because in theory, I absolutely love it. So I guess when I first heard of the Tokyo rig, you were kind of like the Tokyo rig guy. Like you were in all the videos I saw introducing it, all of the marketing material, everything. So for starters, I guess for people that don't know what we're talking about, how would you describe a Tokyo rig?
Yeah, so Tokyo rig is it's a rigging method for plastics that allows the bait to move more freely, gives the lure a different action, and isn't impeded by the weight. That might be the best way to sum up a Tokyo rig. But before I get into it, I can tell you that, I saw the Tokyo rig when I went to Japan. I want to say it was back in 2008. I had an amazing trip 2008, 2009. I had an amazing trip to Japan, and I got to fish 6 or 7 different lakes, including Lake Biwa. I've got to fish with some amazing Japanese anglers, including Marizo Shimizu. Just amazing experience, life-changing experience. And I had a day on the water where a Japanese angler really destroyed me. And I'm honest when I say it, like, destroyed me with a Tokyo rig. And it's those kind of things that opens up your eyes to something that's new, right? And I remember after he caught the first 2, I said, what is that? And I still have none. And I look at it, and I'm like, God, that's weird looking. Like, what's that wire? And I kept punching or kept Texas rigging. Nothing. Now he's 4 up, and I'm like, all right. I'm like, let me look at that again. And then you think, well, maybe like a short leader drop shot, right? Like, what's the difference between this and a short leader drop shot? So I stick on a short leader drop shot, catch 1, but then he catches like 3 more. And you get to the point where you're like, okay, this is legitimately doing something different that the fish are responding to, right? So I got to bring it home from Japan with me and really got to sort of develop it here in the States with VMC. And that was amazing product development experience with VMC. And, the key to a Tokyo rig, and I'll try to describe it without one in my hand, but it's a barrel swivel. Your line attaches to the top of the barrel swivel. On the bottom of the barrel swivel is a drop lead, is a wire drop lead that's open-ended, and it's about 4 inches long. Off the right side, or off the side of the barrel swivel, is a split ring with a hook. And when you think about it, you're like, okay, what's the deal with that? And then on that wire, the open wire, you could slide on any weight you want, right? You could put on a tungsten worm weight, you could put on a football head weight, a lead barrel sinker, whatever you want. And you put that weight on and then close the wire. So, there's a couple benefits right there, which is really, really easy way to change your weights, to change on the fly. But more importantly, when you put that weight on that wire and you throw that lure out there, and I've done it so many times in a testing tank up in Minnesota working with VMC, and also here in the shop I have a little tank. It's unbelievable to see that bait off the bottom and the movement, the fluidity that the bait has. And so, like when I tied on that short leader drop shot, I thought, well, this is exactly the same, but it didn't work the same. And why? On a Tokyo rig, that wire, that 4-inch wire, and you could actually modify the length of that too, that wire is rigid. And the rigid nature of the wire keeps it off the bottom, right? It doesn't compress. So it stays off the bottom. The bait has movement, unlike a Texas rig, unlike a shaky head, unlike a lot of rigging systems. It has fluid side-to-side movement. And then the last thing, and for the guys that do a lot of flipping and pitching, you're really gonna get this one when I say it. The weight does not impede the bait, and it does not impede the hook set when you get a bite. And that's really, really a big one on the Tokyo rig. So a normal Texas rig, or even a shaky head, or even a skirted jig, the weight and the hook are attached together, right? And if you're punching, then you have a 1-ounce tungsten weight, and you have it pegged to a 4-aught flipping hook. When that fish eats it, he eats the bait and the weight at the same time. And when you set the hook, the weight is like a bullet, right? You're hitting them hard, and the weight wants to shoot out of their mouth. You miss a lot of fish. I miss a lot of fish fishing a regular Texas rig or punching rig. But because the weight is separate from the bait on a Tokyo rig, they hit the bait. They never hit the weight. And you're able to hook and land a lot more fish. It's a really versatile bait. I can tell you, when we designed it for pitching and flipping around cover, wood, and grass and punching. And as now we're probably going on 3 or 4 years of Tokyo rig, guys like Gerald Swindle and Polinick and all these guys that have figured out different ways. Now they're dragging it out deep. Now instead of putting the worm weight with the pointy side down, they're putting the pointy side up, and they're dragging it in 20, 30 foot with a crawl. Brandon's fishing with a swim bait. Guys are fishing it on beds with a light wire hook. Now they have VMC has 4 different hook styles. So it's opened up. But the main thing with the Tokyo rig, like other things, is it presents the bait in a different way, and the bait has different action. And that's what I want everybody to keep in their mind. Is it a cure-all? Does it solve every problem? No. But it's different than a Tokyo. It's different than a Texas rig. It's different than a jig. It's different than a short leader drop shot. It's different than a Jika rig. It's very unique in its action.
And when I first saw it, I think I was gravitated toward it because it looked like it should be so versatile. Like, it's one of those things where it's like it should shine in open water because, like you said, it's basically a Texas rig, short rig drop shot. Like, it's more or less what it is, except, like you said, it's got a rigid kind of bottom line on it. It should shine on rock because that weight should bang up against rock and keep that plastic above the rock, so that fish actually has a chance to engulf that whole thing better than to have to go nose down and pick it up off the rocks. In silt, it should kick up that silt and keep the bait just slightly above where that silt cloud is. So again, you're getting a little better kind of accuracy from the fish, hopefully, when they're going for this thing. So when I looked at it, I thought, that has to be so versatile. And then the more I thought about it, you brought up a good point about punching. And it looked like it should be a no-brainer punching. Because like you said, at first you're like, oh, it's too bulky to go through, and punch correctly. But it's not, because that weight is going in first, and it should just like suck that plastic down, is I guess what it should do.
Yeah, it's like a ball and chain. It's the same thing I thought. When I first looked at it, the guy in Japan, we were fishing grass. I looked at it and said, how in the hell is he catching all these fish on this thing? Surely, but you hit it on the head. That weight sort of acts as a ball and chain. The ball is the weight, the chain is the wire, and then it goes to the bait. So it punches the hole in grass, punches the hole through, and the bait comes free. It doesn't, the weight catches all the grass. The weight makes the hole, and then the bait's free. It's amazing. And then the other thing, when I first looked at it, I thought, man, that's too much. You got a swivel, you got a split ring, you got a wire. I sort of looked at it, I'm like, that's too much stuff, But it's a lot like an Alabama rig. They don't see that wire. The wire's black. The swivels, they don't see any of that. They're so focused on the fluidity of that bait, the new movement of that bait, that the wire doesn't matter. Just like an Alabama rig, the wire doesn't matter,
Yep. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think we give fish way too much credit for picking up on that kind of stuff. I mean, if that was true, like, they'd never hit a Texas rig in clear water with a giant 5/0 EWG hook sticking out of it. Like, that doesn't look natural. Giant trebles on your top water don't look natural. Like, there's so much stuff that just doesn't look natural to a fish that I don't think little stuff like that's really what's going to turn them away. So I'm right there with you. Where do you stand on line choice with the Tokyo rig, depending on what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm a 50-50 guy with the Tokyo rig, and my 2 line choices are fluorocarbon and braid. And a lot of it relates to the cover and a little bit of the water clarity. In more moderate to sparse cover scenarios, I'm a big believer in fluorocarbon. I think it's a dense line. It lets the bait get down quick. It's invisible, less stretch than mono. So I'm a big believer in fluorocarbon. That 12 to 20 pound tests, 15, 17, I fish a lot on a Tokyo rig. But in heavy cover, when we're talking about true pitching and flipping, true punching, whether it's pads or hydrilla or milfoil, heavy standing timber, I like the braid. And I like the braid just because I land a lot more fish. I get more positive hookups. But I don't necessarily use that gorilla type of braid. I'm not the 65 to 80 pound class guy. When I fish a Tokyo rig with braid, I fish 40. I fish 50 a lot. Even in the heaviest of cover, I fish a lot of 50. And, I think in heavy cover, braid is okay to fish on a Tokyo rig.
What is your absolute favorite cover to fish it in? I mean, we touched on that you can use it in open water, rock bottom, clay bottom, wood, vegetation. Where's your favorite place to throw it?
Favorite place to throw it's still in grass. It's that same scenario where I learned all those years ago in Japan. It's a very, very special bait in Japan, and especially when there's a lot of pressure. For anglers that are watching and listening to this right now, if you fish grass lakes, and you'll know what I'm talking about. You can look up that grass edge. You get out there, and a lot of times there's a dozen boats in front of you, and they're all punching. They're all punching the regular punch rig, right? A little crawl with a big weight on it, or they're flipping a big jig, a big heavy jig. They're all doing it. You look up there, you're like, oh my God, they're all doing it. And you can literally go behind people with a Tokyo rig and catch them because, again, it looks different. It's a different action of that bait. So for me, my success in the last 2 or 3 years, both in tournaments and fun fishing, a lot of it is revolved around grass fishing with that Tokyo rig. But I would say number 2 for me would be, watching Gerald and Brandon and guys like that catch them deep. And I've really started to experiment with that, recently. My last Thousand Islands event I was fishing for bass back then, so it was a few years back. I caught my very biggest fish every day. I caught a lot of the numbers on a drop shot, but when I got bit big, I got bit big on a Tokyo rig, and I was fishing it in 20 to 30 foot of water in heavy current in the St. Lawrence. So it's just as good in deep water.
And then last question for you. What plastics do you gravitate toward? Obviously, you said you like fishing it in heavy cover and in weeds and vegetation. What plastics are you throwing on it?
Yeah, so it's interesting. That's really opened up over the years. My favorite has always been a creature or beaver style bait. I'm a big fan of that 3.5 to 4 to even 5-inch creature or beaver style bait. So, Berkeley makes a great max scent beaver style bait that I've had a lot of success with. Their crawl baits I've had a lot of success with. They have another one called a jester, it's sort of like a double-tailed beaver. It's hard to describe, but it's a compact bait. They're really, really, really good on a Tokyo rig. For whatever reason, they're really, really good. But that window has opened up. When that guy was kicking my butt in Japan, he was using a straight-tail worm. Dude, he was using I want to call it a Japanese trick worm, because that's what it looked like. It was by a company called Depths, but it was a 6 or 7 inch straight tail worm. It was a trick worm, And I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, I mean,
it's weird.
So it's very weird. So it's phenomenal with worms. I've heard guys using 10 and 12 inch power worms with it. I've used it with a tube, a 4-inch flipping tube. It's very, very good with a flipping tube. And now, last year, VMC started launching the Tokyo rig with lighter wire finesse style hooks. And now it's really opening up. So now, the whole wave of soft stick baits to fluke style baits to, swim baits and grubs, all that's opened up now. So the great thing about it is it's a technique that, even though it's a couple, 3, 4 years old now, it's still very new, and there are no the great thing. So, people that are watching and listening, go home and experiment. There's no rules with the Tokyo rig right now, and you can catch a lot of fish with it. That's for sure.
Well, that's awesome. There you have it, folks. Tokyo rig tips with the man himself, Ike. Before we let you go, what do you have coming up on the horizon that people should be looking out for, or where do you want to direct folks to kind of keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Of course, on all my social media accounts, I'm very, very into posting, and I don't post just sponsor, obligations. I don't try to sell hard every post. I try to keep people up to date with what I'm doing in my life. So, go to all my social accounts, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, at Mike Iaconelli. YouTube, you mentioned that. I appreciate it. Mike Iaconelli Fishing on YouTube. We got we launch 2 pieces of content every week on our YouTube channel. So it's, subscribe. Go over there and subscribe. We have some great stuff to you. And then, of course, MikeIaconelli.com is the homepage. Everything new is listed on there. I can tell you that I haven't even mentioned this on a podcast yet. So this is like a first. This is like groundbreaking. I have a new TV project that I'm working on right now that is very, very, very exciting. It's really, I would say, it's the future for me. It's what I want to do, and it's not just bass fishing; it's fishing. You're going to definitely hear more about it in the next couple of weeks, but very excited about this new TV show I'm launching, and it's going to hit a lot of people that don't normally fish, and just right along the lines of what we talked about the whole podcast, it's going to get more people fishing, and I'm so excited about it. So, new TV show coming up. Last but not least, just since I'm sitting here, I got to throw a plug for my son Vegas. My son Vegas has his own hat already. Go over to my website and cop one of Vegas's hats. He's selling them, and he actually used his own money to buy. He only bought like 3 dozen of these hats, and we still have some. So head over to MikeIaconelli.com to shop. Cop yourself a Vegas hat for Christmas.
They're sweet looking too. That logo is pretty dirty.
Isn't that a great logo?
Did he help design that?
So we have a amazing, amazing graphic designer that we work with, James Riley. Shout out to James Riley, who designed our Up Ike logo and does a lot of stuff for our business. Bash U logo, all the logos, James Riley. He came up with that logo for Vegas the Hammer. So, yeah, check it out. Good holiday gift right there, Vegas the Hammer hat.
Well, there you have it, folks. The man, the myth, the legend himself, Mr. Mike Iaconelli. Ike, thanks for joining us, man.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, and want everybody to have a great holiday. Good luck, good fishing. God bless everybody. Appreciate it.
All right, that was our conversation with Mike Iaconelli. Ike, thanks so much for stopping by. A true class act, a great guy for the sport of fishing. If you enjoyed this conversation, I encourage you to go check out his YouTube, check out his Instagram or Facebook to keep up with what he's doing, but also some of the other stuff we mentioned. So, check out the Ike Foundation. I think that's one of the coolest things that he does. See how you can get involved with that if that was something that piqued your interest. I encourage you to check out Bass U, check out Ike Live, everything that he's doing. Again, just a very well-rounded guy in the sport and someone that I think is great for the sport, very entertaining, and a good ambassador for fishing. So, thank you so much, as always, for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you get your podcasts. If you can leave us a review, that helps a ton. If you want to keep up with us or you have any questions, you can find us on Facebook, on Instagram at Tackle Talk Podcast. We have a website, www.tackletalkpodcast.com. Again, thank you to each and every one of you that are listening that keep this show going and let us do what we do. Thank you to our sponsors, Top Fishing Deals, Dark Horse Tackle. You guys make this possible too. And we will see you next Tuesday for another episode of Tackle Talk.